One question of obvious interest at the time and since was whether Margaret Thatcher got along with the Queen. Today I'm going back to Britain, my country of origin, to talk about Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first female prime minister, who was nicknamed the Iron Lady. The nickname was meant as an insult. It was given by a Russian politician, but she picked it up and turned it into a compliment and often referred to herself as the Iron Lady from that time on. The political issues of Margaret Thatcher's day all focus around what happened to Britain between World War II and 1979 when she came into office. Margaret Thatcher was absolutely determined to change Britain's course. She rejected nationalisation and she did everything she could to re-privatise the British economy with a fairly high degree of success. And perhaps most significant of all, she broke the power of Britain's overmighty trade unions, which had had a disproportionate say in the politics of the years since 1945. In addition to that, she won a war against Argentina, which made her enormously popular. And she halted Britain's relative decline. From 1945 onward, Britain was becoming steadily less important as a world power and as an economic power. And the decline came to seem almost inevitable until her administration. And from then on, Britain's prominent role in the world has to a large degree recovered. And so her administration between 1979 and 1990 marks an absolute transition point in the fortunes of Britain as a nation in the world. One question of obvious interest at the time and since was whether Margaret Thatcher got along with the Queen. They were born the same year, 1925, so they were exact contemporaries. And outwardly, they maintained a show of mutual respect and mutual admiration, although actually neither liked the other. Thatcher went to visit the Queen every week. The Queen found her views intolerable or difficult to bear, and she found Margaret Thatcher terribly inflexible. But when they were in public, as in this meeting with President Reagan, they were always careful to maintain a show of unanimity. And Thatcher certainly respected the monarchy as an emblem of Britain's national unity. Upstaging both of them in the 80s, of course, was Princess Diana, whose marriage to Prince Charles had taken place in 1982. So Thatcher, the Queen, and Princess Diana were the three most prominent British women in the 1980s, and there was lots of tension among all of them. The beginning of the end for Thatcher as Prime Minister came in 1990 when Geoffrey Howe resigned. He was the only one of her original ministers from 1979 who'd been continuously in her presence throughout the 12 years of her leadership. But in 1990, he resigned when she undermined his position over the question of the European Monetary Union, the EMU. He was strongly in favour of it. He thought he'd negotiated this for Britain, only to be overridden in public by Thatcher, which led to his resignation in disgrace. At that point, she was challenged for leadership inside her own party, something which can happen to any time to a party leader. And her two prominent rivals were Michael Heseltine, whom you can see on the left in this picture, and John Major, whom you can see on the right. Well, in the first ballot, Margaret Thatcher did win the most votes, but she didn't win an overall majority, which meant that she would then have to face a runoff election. And rather than do so, she accepted the advice of her senior advisors that by now she was so unpopular in the nation as a whole for her autocratic ways that she'd be likely to lead the Conservative Party to defeat rather than victory when the next election came along. So at that point, she did resign, handing over not to Heseltine, who'd hoped to be able to win, but to John Major, who became her successor. Here she is speaking outside number 10 Downing Street for the last time, and they're typical newspaper posters. Maggie quits as MP. That was her official, or not official, but her most common nickname. So she was succeeded by John Major, a British Prime Minister of the late 20th century who hadn't got a college degree. And he won the next election of 1992, so that the Conservatives were in office uninterrupted from 79 right through to 97, 18 years, when finally Labour Party leader Tony Blair was able to win an election. It was in 92, under Major's leadership, that Britain finally signed the Maastricht Treaty, bringing into being the European Union, a much closer union between the various political members of Europe. Thatcher's comment was, "I would never have signed that treaty." She wrote her memoirs. She went to a seat in the House of Lords after 1992, and she had the honour of being given a bronze statue in the House of Commons. They often appear, but usually after the person's death. Hers appeared before she died, and her comment was at the opening of the statue, "I might have preferred iron, but bronze will do. It won't rust." In subsequent years, she was honoured in many parts of the world, particularly in Spain, where a plaza in Madrid was renamed the Plaza Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher died in 2013, and she was divisive right to the end. The Daily Mail, a Conservative paper, said, "The woman who saved Britain," and that's certainly the Conservative view. The Daily Mirror, a Labour party, says, a Labour paper says, "The woman who divided a nation." And The Guardian from the left says, "She became harder than hard." There were areas of Britain, particularly Brixton in South London, where enormous demonstrations took place celebrating the fact that she died, with demonstrators holding posters that said, "The bitch is dead." So right to the end of her life, she stirred very strong feelings. But there's no question that Margaret Thatcher was a very, very important person and a vitally important leader whose administration in the 1980s marks the great dividing line in Britain's post-World War II political history.